Hi guys, so my good friend Jeff Taylor uploaded this video recently where he responded to what's happening in Belfast and other parts of Northern Ireland, the violence we're seeing on our screens. Now, Jeff is a Brexiteer. Jeff voted for Brexit. He campaigned for Brexit, but he's blaming the European Union for the problems we're seeing at the moment. So let's hear what he had to say.
Now, the recent violence in Northern Ireland is inexcusable. It must stop. It helps no one, especially not the UK. However, when one side sees that the other has been appeased due to the threat of returning violence, as well as the conduct of the police during recent riots where those who threatened the most got the most, then others may see it as a viable route to getting their own way. Sickening, I know.
Now, it's important to remember that there were three possible options here when it came to Brexit. Now, we also have to remember that the Irish didn't vote for Brexit. The people of Northern Ireland didn't vote for Brexit. The European Union didn't want Brexit. Remainers in the rest of the UK highlighted this as a possible problem, as a likely problem. But the response from Brexiteers and people like Jeff was, stop trying to stop Brexit. So what were the three possible options? There was a border. The first option was a border on the island of Ireland. The second was a border in the Irish Sea. Or the third option was for the UK as a whole to remain part of the single market and the customs union. Now, Brexiteers like Jeff didn't want the third option. They didn't want the UK, and they still don't want the UK to rejoin, for example, the single market and the customs union, which would actually solve a lot of problems related to Brexit, unrelated to Northern Ireland. For example, businesses would be able to trade much easier, but he doesn't want that. So the two other options were, for Northern Ireland, a border in the Irish Sea or a border on the island of Ireland. Now, he's talking about people making threats. But the problem with having a border on the island of Ireland is that it would be in breach of the Good Friday Agreement. So the British government said that they would not breach the Good Friday Agreement, so we're left with one other option. Remember, UK part of the Single Market and Customs Union was not acceptable to Brexiteers. Border on the island of Ireland would damage the Good Friday Agreement, which the UK government said that they would protect. So the only other option was a border in the Irish Sea. Now, you can call that appeasement, but what other option is there available, Jeff?
The recent flare-up in Northern Ireland, where last night saw Unionist youths squaring up against their Republican counterparts, pitching Protestant against Catholic, has brought the horrors of decades past into the present for the inhabitants of Northern Ireland. All driven by the new, once promised light touch, now very heavily EU-regulated Irish Sea border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK.
Now, he's trying to play up the idea that this is some, hard border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's not. This is about goods. It's not about people. People are freely able to travel between Great Britain and Northern Ireland and back between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. This does not affect people. It affects goods. Now, Brexiteers and Unionists in Northern Ireland will try to paint the picture that this is destroying the Union. It's separating Northern Ireland and its people from the rest of the UK. But this is about goods. And it's a specific list of goods. It's not about people. Now, there are some restrictions on moving to Northern Ireland, but once again, this is the consequence of Brexit. It's also important to remember that about 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, there was an outbreak of foot and mouth disease. And there were checks put in place between Great Britain and the island of Ireland to protect the island of Ireland from foot and mouth disease. These were checks carried out between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and Unionists didn't have a problem with that. Once again, this is about goods, not people, goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. And Brexiteers are trying to paint it as a picture of the United Kingdom is collapsing because of this. But even if it were the case, even if the UK was collapsing because of this, falling apart, who is responsible for this? It's Brexiteers. They wanted this. They voted for this. They campaigned for this.
The Good Friday Agreement was not upset by Brexit.
Lies. It was upset by Brexit. We're seeing it upset now by Brexit. Of course, Brexiteers will try to say it's not Brexit's fault. But why is it? They don't actually go on and explain why it's not Brexit's fault. I'll explain why it is Brexit's fault. Up until this stage, there was no problem. Now there is a problem. Brexit changed everything. You can't get away from that. The protocol is part of the withdrawal agreement. The withdrawal agreement is the consequence of Brexit. Now, you can complain about it all you want, but the UK government agreed to it. It's not, Brexiteers will try to paint it as the EU enforced the withdrawal agreement. The EU is enforcing the Northern Ireland Protocol on the British people. Boris Johnson signed up to it. Boris Johnson campaigned for it. It was Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. Oven-ready deal. I had said this back last year when Boris Johnson was saying, vote for me back in 2019. Vote for me. Vote for our Brexit-ready or oven-ready Brexit deal. I said, this is not a deal. It's the withdrawal agreement. Brexiteers were happy with it. Now they have a problem with it. If Brexit didn't happen, we would not be seeing this violence take place in Northern Ireland. You can't get away from that.
It is being upset by insistence from Brussels on the hardest possible border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain.
Once again, these are lies because it's not the hardest of border because it affects goods. It doesn't affect people. There are harder borders between the European Union countries and other countries outside the European Union, where there are checks on people. This is about checks on goods. It's not about people. So it's not the hardest of borders. This is him just trying to paint the picture that it's the hardest of borders in order to paint the EU in a bad light. This is quite dishonest.
Based on EU interpretation of that protocol. And being naive, I assumed it was a lack of understanding of the Northern Irish situation that had led the EU to play games with the Good Friday Agreement.
This is pure projection. The idea that the EU didn't understand the Northern Ireland situation, didn't understand the Good Friday Agreement. Brexiteers are saying that the European Union doesn't understand the Good Friday Agreement. The protocol is there to protect the Good Friday Agreement. Brexit ignored the Good Friday Agreement. It had to be pushed through later because Brexiteers didn't understand. At the beginning, what was the response from Brexiteers at the beginning? Project Fear. Stop using Northern Ireland as a tool, as a cudgel against Brexit. Scaremongering. There won't be a return to violence. And what are we seeing now? Remainers had said at the time, look, you're playing with fire here. Brexit is a bad idea. It's a bad idea for Northern Ireland. And it's even worse idea for Northern Ireland because the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted against Brexit. It's been forced upon them. They didn't want it. By people in England who don't understand Northern Ireland and don't give a crap about Northern Ireland. I'm not saying Jeff doesn't give a crap about Northern Ireland, but I've recently uploaded videos of members of the ERG, senior members, who basically don't give a crap about Northern Ireland. But they wanted their Brexit.
But I now have the sneaking suspicion that Brussels, being well briefed by certain people in Dublin, knows exactly what it's doing.
Blame the Irish. The Irish are sticking their nose in where it doesn't belong. The EU are sticking their nose in where it doesn't belong. Look, even if you wanted to sell that line, the problem with that line is Boris Johnson, the British government, the UK Parliament backed this. So you can't blame the European Union. You have to blame or if you want to blame the European Union, you also have to blame Boris Johnson's government. And we don't hear Jeff complaining about Parliament backing something that strips Northern Ireland away from the rest of the European Union.
They have seen the start of unrest in Northern Ireland, and if I'm right, Brussels will now double down on even stricter Irish sea border demands and further legal action.
What he's trying to do here, which is quite clever, Jeff is very clever, he knows that more checks are coming because this is part of the agreement between Great Britain and the UK government and the European Union. And what he's trying to predict, look, the European Union is going to become more aggressive because he knows that there are more checks coming because certain grace periods are coming to an end. And he's trying to present himself as maybe an oracle who's predicting more damage coming along down the road because the European Union just want to destroy the Union.
So what could be their aim? To try and force a united Ireland would have dire repercussions for them, as shown by the last few days.
Notice the language he's using. The EU is trying to force a united Ireland. He's not actually presenting any evidence to support that claim. He's just trying to place in the minds of his listeners, the EU are trying to force a united Ireland. Maybe they're not trying to force a united Ireland. Maybe that's not their goal. But he's planting in people's mind the idea that the EU is getting involved in the UK in some way, trying to force something upon the people of Northern Ireland. It's quite disgusting, actually.
It's not going to happen anytime soon, not without a full debate and a proper border poll with an assured peaceful outcome to any decision taken by the people.
You understand that it's the UK government that would be responsible for a border poll, not the EU. Okay? It's not the EU that's going to be forcing any border polls. It's part of the Good Friday Agreement. It would be the responsibility of the British government, not the EU. But Jeff doesn't want his listeners to know that.
But one glance at social media shows how high temperatures run over this issue on both sides. Demands by Republicans of hand the North back are met by cries of no surrender by the pro-UK Unionists. At the moment, the Good Friday Agreement is all we have, and the EU seems intent on trashing that for its own ends.
What ends? The EU want to trash the Good Friday Agreement. If they wanted to trash the Good Friday Agreement, why would they put in place the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is actually there to defend the Good Friday Agreement? The only people who want to thrash the Good Friday Agreement are the DUP in Northern Ireland and Brexiteers in England.
So maybe the EU plan is to place the UK in the position of being forced to sign Brexit away.
So what he's trying to do here is he's trying to say that, oh, well, the UK will be forced by the EU to rejoin the single market and the customs union. Now, I have said on numerous occasions, if Brexiteers created this problem, there is a way out of this problem, and it's rejoining the single market and the customs union. Now, we have to remember that leaving the single market and the customs union was never a requirement of Brexit. If you disagree with me, show me a ballot that said leaving the single market and the customs union, because there isn't one. And even if you say, well, certain leave campaigners said we were going to leave the single market and customs union, you can also find other ones who said, no, we will not be leaving it. Once again, rejoining the single market and the customs union would have zero impact on Brexit, because Brexit was about leaving the European Union, ending membership. Brexiteers like Jeff don't want to rejoin the single market and the customs union. I don't know for what reason personally. I know there are certain Brexiteers don't want that. But it would not impact Brexit. It would not be a betrayal of Brexit. It would resolve this problem, though. I'm not saying that's what the UK should do. Well, technically, I think it would be a good idea, but it's up to the British people if they want to rejoin the single market and the customs union. The EU is not forcing them to. The EU have never said you have to rejoin the single market and the customs union. This is all Brexiteers' fault, and all the decision lies with Brexiteers. Boris Johnson is a Brexiteer. He has an 80-seat majority in Parliament, full of Brexiteers. They will be the ones to decide whether the UK rejoins the single market and the customs union. And notice the violence is taking place on the loyalist side. It's not Republicans, it's not pro-Irish people who are forcing, in a sense, in Jeff's eyes, the UK government to rejoin the single market and the customs union.
By permanently aligning itself to full rule-taking from the EU to get rid of any need for an internal UK border, so easing tensions in Northern Ireland.
Of course, he calls it rule-taking.
The UK government cannot allow violence to force that to happen. We must either trigger Article 16...
Once again, people who don't understand Article 16 just throw out Article 16 as if it's some sort of silver bullet. Article 16 is actually designed to protect the protocol. It's not ending the protocol.
Or press for the EU to back up its claims that it respects the Good Friday Agreement by immediately dropping its outlandish Irish border demands and its legal action.
So you want, basically what he wants the EU to do is to withdraw from the withdrawal agreement, to end the withdrawal agreement, to end the Northern Ireland Protocol. But if the EU signed up to it, and the UK signed up to it, why would the EU break the withdrawal agreement? You know, you could say we should sit down and renegotiate the withdrawal agreement. If you want to push that line, okay. But you're asking the EU to break international law because the UK agreed to something that it didn't understand. That's just insane.
That would straight away ease tensions. Then work on a proper replacement to the protocol can take place.
Such as? What is the... Notice that the Brexiteers say we need to throw away the protocol. The protocol is the problem. Dump the protocol. And replace it with what, Jeff? What would you envisage as a replacement for the Northern Ireland Protocol? Because I've yet to hear an actual answer from Brexiteers. What is the replacement for the Northern Ireland Protocol? You understand that it took a lot of time and effort to actually come up with the protocol. And you say that, well, we can fix something up over a weekend, or we can have some sort of alternative to it. What is it, Jeff? I don't know.
But to make this work, we would also need to agree to hold a border poll in the north and south of Ireland within about 5 years, after tempers have hopefully returned to normal.
That is not how is that related to the Northern Ireland Protocol?
And the outcome of that poll must be respected. But watch out for the billions in support for a unified Ireland coming in from around the world, from places like the US, to skew any referendum.
Really, sometimes I think Jeff is a comedian. The idea that, yeah, we don't want outside money being pumped into a referendum. You know, like the way that the Brexit referendum had dark money pumped in order to convince the public to vote in a particular way, or why when you had people like Aaron Banks who have hundreds of millions of pounds in the bank were willing to spend money in order to convince people to vote a particular way. Surely you wouldn't want something like that, Jeff. Of course not. So once again, Jeff is pushing the line that the EU is responsible for the problems facing Northern Ireland. The EU is responsible for the damage Brexit is doing, not Brexiteers, not the idea that Brexiteers never understood Brexit, or that when the problems of Brexit were presented to them in the past, their response was, that's Project Fear. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?